Hi everybody, thank you for joining. We'll be making a start in 1 minute if that's okay. We're just waiting for a couple more people to just join the call. I feel like you need some hold music.
You're welcome to sing, Rachel.
Okay, fab. Thank you very much. I'll hand over to Andrew.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining the webinar today so promptly. My name is Andrew Large. I'm a past chair of the Energy Intensive Users Group, and I'm also Director General of the Confederation of Paper Industries. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar on the question of the skills needs of the energy intensive industries. Just before I introduce speakers and set the ball rolling, just a couple of housekeeping matters, if I could. Firstly, I'd be grateful if people would stay on mute if you're not speaking, just to keep the background noise levels down. And secondly, the raise hand function is operative here, so if people want to participate in the discussion at the end, then please use the raise hand function. One last thing, this webinar is being recorded and the recording will be available on the Cogent Skills YouTube channel, and we'll make that available to you all and also then for dissemination more widely to people who couldn't participate today as we go forwards. Just two other quick issues to clarify. Firstly, we are also, meeting as representatives of competing industries, and therefore competition law compliance remains paramount. Nothing in today's agenda or in the conversation is in any way, shape or form a breach of competition law. We are talking about improvements to the overall macro conditions of an industry rather than individual commercial issues, and we'll be vigilant to ensure that we remain at that level in our conversation. Final piece by way of introduction is those who know EIUG will remember that it has a long history of campaigning on the issue of energy costs for energy intensive industries. Over the last few years, it's become apparent that no conversation about energy costs is complete without a conversation about climate change and about the costs and opportunities that exist around the transition to net zero. And recently, EIUG has taken the formal decision to extend the scope of its activities so that it is also considering climate change issues, and therefore the skills that are required for energy intensive industries are of increasing importance to the question of being able to manage in the new net zero environment. And as a result, our engagement with Cogent Skills and this webinar today has been created. So that's all I'd like to say at this point, and it's my pleasure to introduce firstly Justine Foch, who is the Chief Executive of Cogent Skills. And next slide, please.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that introduction and for the opportunity to talk today. Just very briefly, a little bit about who we are and why we're here today. Cogent Skills is an industry charity. We're actually owned by our trade association colleagues, and we are here with a kind of, I guess, a drive which is to support industries to collaborate around getting the best skills solutions that they can. So we help by facilitating collaborations. We also advocate for industries, particularly with the Department for Education, to try and get the skills system to work better for industry. We actively help to develop apprenticeship standards in England and actually across the whole of the UK. Apprenticeship frameworks. We're heavily involved in the vocational education system. So real specialists in what we do, and particularly in working in high hazard industries and industrial science industries. We look after a range of industries, so chemical sectors, industrial biosector, nuclear, which you'll hear a little bit about today, and life sciences amongst many, and almost all of the kind of industrial science-based industries as well. So we're here as an industry sector organisation on the side of employers trying to get the best out of the skills system that we possibly can. We, as a charity, we have income streams for a variety of areas, and we have individual services that we sell into member companies and to the wider industry at large. But not here to talk about those today, but very much focused on talking about the opportunities and sharing with you some of the work we've been doing around about green skills, which is a horrible phrase, but or low carbon skills, and to share some of the insights that are coming from the work that we're doing around about that whole area. So that's all about us, really. Next slide.
That's great. Thank you very much, Justine. And if I can now also introduce Arjen Haveke. He is the director of the Energy Intensive Users Group.
Morning, my name is Arjen Haveke. Probably most of you will probably know me. I'm the director of the EIUG. And the EIUG is an umbrella organization of the most energy intensive sectors in the UK, ranging all the way from UK steel to paper, chemicals, cement, glass, and on top of my head, ceramics and industrial gases as well. And as Andrew said as well, so the focus has been over the past year on competitive energy prices and security of energy supply, but all these two main things are basically impacted quite heavily by climate change policies and the way that these energy industries can decarbonize. So we changed the objectives also slightly to include cost-effective industrial decarbonization, and obviously the skills element is a key part of that. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Arjen. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So if I can just introduce very quickly what the remaining elements of the webinar are going to be. So Justine is going to give us an overview of the current landscape with regard to the skills sector. We're then going to look into some case studies of the particular industry sectors and what they have done with regard to their skills needs. We can then open up to the floor for a discussion, and then I'll bring everything back to the end with summing up and a call to action before we close. So for the overview of the current landscape, if I could hand back over to Justine, please, and we'll move on to slide 6. Thank you. Justine, I believe you're muted.
I just spotted. Thank you, Andrew. So just really wanted to share, I guess, some of the insight that's coming from the work we're doing, particularly looking at how our industries are impacted by the move to net zero. So just, and some of this you may feel, is it relevant to my organisation? But I think hopefully you'll see that from a skills and workforce perspective, it's highly relevant. So the first thing to say really about the move to net zero is that a lot of it is about the production of new forms of energy, resulting in either brand new industries or expanding industries. I'm going to talk about nuclear in a minute, so I'll come back to that one. But we have a range of expanding new nascent industries, including carbon capture, hydrogen production, storage, distribution and usage. You've got battery manufacture and usage. And also wind generation. And some of these are existing industries, but the capacity and size of the requirements that they have for people will be exponentially increasing. And others are brand new industries where we will have a need for new people. So you just move to the next slide. I'll give an example of what the growth means in terms of net zero for nuclear. So this is we do some labour market intelligence. We work with the nuclear sector in a very collaborative way, looking at their workforce demands. And you can see here with the blue line what the demand will be in the future, and currently kind of what the yellow line is in terms of the shortfall on based on current recruitment and attrition levels. So we're looking at a situation where by 2030 they're going to need an additional 123,000 people, and that is just to cover the planned nuclear developments. That doesn't necessarily include things like SMR rollouts as well. And we know that SMR rollouts is all about manufacturing, and making on site. So there's additional demands going to be coming through from nuclear, but already we can see a workforce that is really, really, it's going to increase rapidly. And the types of skills that are going to be needed there is there are a lot of construction-based skills, but there are also a lot of operational and engineering roles. I think from memory, there's something like 45,000 engineers needed in this period of time, because it's both civil and defence, and it includes things like brand new submarine manufacture, the AUKUS program, etc., etc. So a huge demand for people coming through in an already quite big and established sector in nuclear. If we just move on then to look at a new industry, if you like, which is hydrogen, the figures at the bottom for hydrogen show it is a quick growing industry. So by 2030, there are going to be 29,000 jobs required in hydrogen. And that's from a low base of around about 600, certainly in 2023. And that's just the direct workforce. In addition to that, there's another 60,000 plus indirect workforce. So that could include things like construction, etc., etc. And some of the work we've also been doing is looking not just at the growth in the workforce that's going to be required, but also in the type of skills that are going to be required. So these heat maps, all you need to really worry about is particularly the top red area, where there's a high criticality for those skills, but also there's a high perceived difficulty of acquiring those skills. And what we see in particularly in the production area, which is probably most interesting and useful, is process engineers, chemical engineers, operations and maintenance process engineering, level 3 maintenance technicians, regulatory inspectors, process safety people. All roles that you will probably be familiar with are those that are increasingly going to be in demand and are increasingly fewer of available. So in summary, there are a number of challenges really around about that move to net zero and what it might mean in terms of the growth of the workforce and the competition for the skills and labour that traditionally might have come into our existing industries, which will also be needed in those new and expanding industries. If you move on to the next slide, please. One of the reasons we know some of this information is that the government have been, over the past year or so, working with a group called the Green Jobs Delivery Group to look at a skills action plan. And how they've done that is they've created several task and finish groups, which have been tasked with providing the evidence base into government around about what are the needs of those sectors based on moving to net zero. And as a result of that, and I'll take you through a little bit of the findings in a second, but they've put together a lot of information, and we've done a lot of labour market intelligence. The task and finish groups did include one on manufacturing, which I think was led by Make UK. We were very heavily involved in working on the hydrogen and carbon capture area. So that's probably the area I can talk most about in terms of helping to establish the metrics, the information, and an understanding of the type of roles that are going to be required. The Green Jobs Delivery Group is aiming to come out with a report and an action plan. We were told in spring 2024, so we can decide when spring actually finishes and when summer, but it's sometime, we believe in May, there will be a report coming out that will basically aggregate all of the information that has been taken from across the board. And I'll come on to that in a second and tell you more about that. But it will take all of that information and identify what kind of actions could be taken by industry and by government to help address some of the challenges in getting to net zero. If you move on to the next slide, I think what's evident from the implications from some of that work is that we see that more workers are going to be required, that yes, there will be a reduction to an extent in oil and gas workforce, but there's no way that those numbers will provide the numbers of people required in these new and emerging industries. The jobs that are required in the future are already those that are in short supply. And interestingly, quite a lot of the new production facilities or energy facilities may not always be in the traditional energy producing regions of the UK. So we will see a very different landscape. We were at a conference yesterday talking to the regulator for aviation, and one of the areas that's been looked at is the ability to generate hydrogen on an air site, on an airfield, so that they can easily generate it and provide it to planes in the future. So we'll see quite a different landscape developing, where traditional areas of production might be augmented by many more areas producing different forms of energy. So quite a whole-scale change. If we move on to the next slide. What are the key issues that then the Green Jobs Delivery Group have identified? Well, there are a number of areas. I won't go through all of these, but I'm happy, I think these slides will be available and happy to share them. But there is demand growth up to 2030 across many industries. And actually 2030 was the timescale for this report, but many of the industries actually peak after 2030. And there's a need to manage the transition of the workforce across that time, particularly things like a construction workforce. We understand that there's something like between 200,000 and 300,000 people shortage in construction over the next 5 years. So trying to understand what that demand is going to be in different regions at different times is quite challenging. Occupations that are going to be required, lots and lots of engineers, electrical trades, welding trades, managerial, and a lot of operations, including plant and construction operatives. So again, those rules, I guess, are very familiar to many on the call. The kind of key skills gaps that were identified were around about STEM skills, some specialist and real niche skills around about hydrogen, nuclear and electrification, but more general ones around about manufacturing as well, and digitalization, which I still can't say. Other areas that they've identified from a policy perspective is the construction phase is really cyclical and sucks in a lot of labour, but then it then doesn't need it anymore, and it's quite regional. So that's a key challenge, I guess. Data, in order to come up with some of the statistics that have been needed, there was very, very little data available. Thankfully, in areas like nuclear and hydrogen, because of the relationships we've got with employers, we're quite well able to provide that. But some other sectors, I don't think were as able to provide data and information. Barriers to training, smaller businesses and self-employed ones are very definitely not incentivized to undertake training, certainly through the existing system that operates. And in addition, there are some training offers that have very low take-up. So there were descriptions of specific training programs developed, for example, for hydrogen or for carbon capture, but the timescales are wrong. They're not needed now, but they might be needed in 2 or 3 years' time. And other training opportunities that government fund just not being subscribed to. A real issue in some of the new and emerging industries, but also for some of our existing ones, is the shortage of qualified staff, tutors and trainers with real industrial expertise. Policy certainty, it was never more uncertain right now at the year of an election, but actually providing certainty so that people can invest, not just in equipment, but also in capital investment on human capital as well, is really, really important. The recognition that a lot of the jobs that are going to come through are in sectors which don't necessarily have a really positive image, and a real need to look at how we can increase the attractiveness of some of the sectors that are involved, and a general bemoaning of the inadequate careers provision that's available that does not really provide up-to-date and modern engagement with young people to help them identify the careers that they might be interested in, nor for those who are actually looking at transitioning from one industry into another to understand the transferability of those skills. Workforce issues that were identified, an ageing and retiring workforce across the board. There is a talk of migration being required to fill some of the roles that are needed in the UK, and competition, so labour competing between sectors, but also internationally. And a really good example of that is if you look abroad to some of the growth that's going to come through on hydrogen and nuclear, many of the skilled people in the UK might be tempted by larger salaries, different living conditions, and the rest. So actually, it's also very much a global competition for particularly high-level talent. One of the big recognitions is a lack of diversity in the workforce now, and actually, whilst there's a desire to have more diversity, tangible evidence of how that's going to happen wasn't really, I think, as obvious. And the transferability of skills to different areas. In theory, there's a transferability, but actually it's not 100% match. So really understanding how workers in one industry could come into another, and understanding what that delta is, the change in skills that they need, it's quite well hidden. So in terms of the existing workforce and training offer, loads of feedback, many of which I think you'll probably relate to, things like the need for the apprenticeship levy to be more flexible, to enable upskilling, more integrated offers where you're really clear from an industry perspective that what's available and how that builds to enhance the career options into your industries. Recognition of the value of standards and qualifications across sectors, but also looking at how transferable they are, and looking across things like modular training, such as boot camps, etc. How can they be utilised to help with this more? Also, the kind of central coordination of subnational skills. A lot of skills activity happens at local regions, and there's been encouragement to I guess, through levelling up and other initiatives, to devolve more of the budget down to local areas. But that's quite a fragmented and complex landscape, particularly for multi-sited organisations. So how do we enhance that national and subnational skills infrastructure? So those were just some of the issues that were identified by the Green Jobs Delivery Group in terms of things that needed to be addressed in the plan. The plan is due to be developed and, as I say, finalised and issued in May. I've got some questions later on around about, will it really change the dial on skills? I suspect it won't. I suspect, given the timing of it, it'll be a report that will identify a lot of challenges, but might be light on solutions. But let's wait and see what government comes up with as a response. So that's just a useful kind of overview of some of the issues that have been identified. If we sort of finalise and move on to the next area, which is really about, I guess, a lot of the focus of this is around about generation of new electric and usage. What does that mean in terms of decarbonising industry? Well, we see the application of those new technologies in a range of transports. So you're seeing them hydrogen in buses and heavy plant. It's being looked at for planes in sort of 2035, I think, being the first flight. Obviously, battery is already in cars, and looking at the next generation of battery cars. So, you know, the usage of it is to decarbonise existing industries. The second area really is, and again, probably more for this audience really is looking at how do we replace our current reliance on carbon-based fuel and power. So what does that mean about the usage of some of this in the workplace? There are some industries, particularly those that rely on natural gas, where there are options for replacements, but also different forms of energy production, and how will we look at that energy production going forward. And then finally, from a domestic settings, replacing natural gas potentially, or at least diluting the proportions of natural gas in the system by using alternatives. So that whole kind of decarbonising piece, I don't think as much has been placed on that importance in the plan, but I think it's a really important area to think about as we move forward. And if you move on to the next slide, some of the implications around about those are mainly in these areas. It won't be different jobs, it will be the same jobs, but there are new technology requirements for new safety and new handling skills. Simply parking a hydrogen bus beside a non-hydrogen bus and thinking about the domino effect of what could happen, it's a different way of thinking. So we also need to think about in industry, what does that mean for the handling of different technologies in the workplace? There's a general lack of awareness of the skills that are needed. Sometimes that's because industries aren't certain of how decarbonisation is going to affect them, what mechanisms and methods are going to use, and therefore they're not quite sure yet of the skills that are going to be needed. The skills that we know are going to be needed range from those around about design to construction operations and maintenance, so it's across the board. We see quite a lot of the higher level skills particularly required in areas such as design. And then there's also the area of how do we manage energy? Are there opportunities going forward to diversify, to look at different ways, different forms of getting energy in, of switching over energy and making it more effective and more efficient for generating your own energy on site, either from waste or from other options? So lots of potential implications around about that usage case and how you decarbonise using some of the new technologies and existing technologies. So in terms of where that takes us to next, really, I think if we move to the next slide, moving forward, there is a question mark about whether the plan that's being produced will actually help all of the industries address the issues. One of the challenges with aggregating issues up to a very broad generalisation is that you lose some of the nuance. So in a year of political change, question marks about exactly whether this plan will be the answer, but it's certainly been an important step in getting industries together to talk about how some of these changes might affect them. I think the question for the energy intensive industries, and one I would pose before letting others speak, really is, Is there clarity on the kind of skills problems that are going to be faced and opportunities, the scale of the challenge, so that kind of that view of the workforce into the future, what is needed to address the problems, and whether there's access to the skills programs that are needed to help the industry. And that's not just in terms of that energy piece, but it's across the board. And one of the examples that Andy's going to talk about later is one way in which we've worked with industry to try and help address some of those skills problems. For me, I think collaboration is key, particularly when there's market failure, which there often is in these areas where the market's not established yet, and somebody needs to help lead that market and identify and articulate it. So how can we help industry come together? We, as I mentioned at the very beginning, we work with a lot of industries, and I'd particularly highlight on two different scales really work that we do. The nuclear industry has a long history. We supported them for over 8 years. And because of the importance, I think, of nuclear, both to energy resilience, but also from a national safety perspective, civil and defence are working much more strongly together, and will be launching a task force action plan that they've developed, along with something in the region of £1 billion worth of funding over 10 years. So it's significant and major, and an aim to double their apprenticeship numbers, and to double their graduate intakes if they're going to address some of the challenges that they've got. So we're supporting them to work on a number of things, including developing advertising campaigns to attract people into nuclear, but also to facilitate them to address some of those challenges that they've got. That's on a massive sort of perspective, but we also support industries in a range of other ways. We have a regional support that we provide to a group of industry, science engineering industries in the Northeast. And also we've worked really well, I think, with the paper industry to help identify where there's a skills gap and how we can work together to develop a solution in the future. So I think really in summary, what I'd like to say is we're here and ready to support and help industries to collaborate and to address their skills needs, whether that's starting at the very beginning with looking at how you can articulate them and identify them and measure them, or whether it's coming together to develop programs and solutions to address them. That's it from me, I think. Andrew?
Thank you so much, Justine. That's incredibly helpful and incredibly useful as an overview of the current issues and challenges. You mentioned towards the end of your remarks there the work that you've been doing with the paper industry, and it's now my pleasure to introduce my colleague Andy Barnetson. He's the Executive Director for Competitiveness at the Confederation of Paper Industries, and he is leading for us on the issue of skills development amongst many other issues that he's working on. So Andy, if I could hand over to you, and if we could move the slides forward one so that you could talk through the case study for the paper industry.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon all. Hopefully you can all hear me. Good. So as Andrew says, Andy Barnetson, Director of Competitiveness for Confederation of Paper Industries. Case study, the work within the paper sector. We of course have the same issue that's true for so many sectors of industry, the ageing workforce, the need for new blood. So we've been working to address that. We've needed to act. And in our case, the paper industry, for a long time, we were able to go to a paper school in Germany. And that met the industry's needs. But then post-Brexit, for a number of reasons, the German paper school decided to stop their English language courses. And so we had to do something nationally in the UK. A number of individual companies across the country tried to set up some sort of local scheme with local providers, but we didn't have the numbers, we couldn't get it off the ground. So what we needed to do was come together as an industry, and I hope what we've got in the last 2 or 3 years is a good example of how cooperation can really work. So January 2022, with the help of Cogent Skills, we formed a consortium, essentially all of the paper mills who had even the slightest interest in supporting apprentices. They came together in our consortium, and we worked at pace through January to September of 22, identifying what we needed in terms of standards, qualifications, delivery model, training providers, putting various options to this consortium, and we established a scheme. We got all the details together, and moving pretty quickly, we were able to get a first cohort of apprentices together. So that's our first cohort, cohort 1. They started September 22. and they're now in their second year. We continued and got a second cohort. They started September last year, so cohort 2 now in their first year. So we've got 2 years of apprentices in place. To be honest, we don't have the numbers that we'd like. We have enough, but considering the need for new blood, considering the impact of the ageing workforce, and now especially considering everything we just heard from Justine about the way that industries like nuclear are going to start taking skilled labour away from us, we really need a new degree of enthusiasm in all this. So part of my role from here on is to encourage the paper mills to make sure they're aware of the scheme. Very grateful to those paper colleagues on call who are engaged or certainly considering engaging in cohort 3. And we do have plans for more numbers. We expect more apprentices into cohort 3 come September of this year. Our consortium of companies continues to meet. We convene bi-monthly to consider any necessary issues, review the process and so on. And behind the scenes, the role of CPI as trade association, again supported by Cogent, is to make sure there's sufficient awareness amongst our membership, that we're bringing in new companies where we can, we're bringing new apprentice numbers, and we're making sure that everyone has the necessary information. So, as I say, better plans for increased numbers in cohort 3. If I look back at our experience across the process, it hasn't always been as easy as I would like to have generated support. With respect to all companies concerned, there is sometimes a small gap between the recognition of the need and the actual undertaking of the work. We do, I think, need a greater degree of input, but that will come. We've also learnt lessons, particularly regarding our cohort 1. We moved at speed to bring them in. We have had some learning experiences around the recruitment, the age, the experience of the apprentices and so on. And we've also faced funding issues. The sad position is that Scottish and Welsh-based companies are not able to draw down on the apprenticeship levy in the same way as companies based in England, and that's very much something for the future to address. So we do have a working system. We do have adequate numbers in cohorts 1 and 2. We do expect an improvement with numbers in cohort 3. And we will expand numbers. We will get to a point where a self-sustaining process. But one of the other things we're looking at specifically in our case, because we're not just for paper mills, Confederation of Paper Industries represents corrugated cardboard conversion and recycling as well. And we're looking from hopefully as early as September 25 to expand this to other sectors. So it will no longer be just for paper makers, no longer just for paper mills, but also potentially for packaging companies as well. And I'm reasonably sure that the two processes, while they have certainly their differences, they're sufficiently similar that we can offer a scheme that is going to cross from paper making into packaging as well. We need to lobby to address the funding implications that I mentioned for Wales and Scotland, and there's a job of work to do there, but I think we have a clear course to ensure this all remains sustainable and grows into the future. One last word is part and parcel of all of this is really the promotion of the industry itself. It's one thing to offer the apprenticeship scheme, and it's one thing to ensure that employers are aware and that they're able to get out to schools and local colleges to engage the employees. But there's really a job of work behind the scenes to raise awareness of the industry. I don't suppose for 1 second that paper industry is particularly attractive. I imagine that young people today want to be in automotive, they want to be in high tech, they want to be in aeronautical, they want to be in pharmaceutical, they may indeed want to be in nuclear. For many, that will be seen as the future. Certainly green jobs, hydrogen, all of this is very attractive. What we need to do as paper making, and perhaps true for other energy intensive industries as well, is really grow the attractiveness of the industry. So behind the scenes, we have plans for promotional campaign, getting out to the consumer, engaging with schools. So alongside the apprenticeship opportunities, it's very much trying to encourage the youth to recognise that it is a good industry to join with some good jobs and good career opportunities. Thank you, Andrew. That's it from me, unless there are questions.
No, thank you very much, Andy. We'll take questions at the end when we're going through the discussion. if I could now hand back over to Ian from EIUG to give his perspective on the energy sector skills challenges.
Yeah, so I look at what the energy sector is doing. I attended the Energy Network Association Innovation Conference last year, and obviously they had a session on skills in there as well, on which National Grid and various distribution network operators gave a presentation about their skills challenges. And I'm just gonna briefly run you through it, and then in the next slide explain what particular National Grid is doing. And it shouldn't come as a surprise to you. Basically, these skill challenges are exactly the same almost for the energy sector as well. So just a couple of highlights on the slide. They face a retirement crunch. So in this energy sector as a whole, 1 in 5 people currently working in the sector are set to retire by 2030. They've highlighted their workforce loss after career breaks. National Grid worked with the energy and utility skills to do some research. And they estimate that 75% of women, for example, who leave the engineering after maternity leave or career break, want to return, but are put off by working hours, for example. And obviously there's competition for STEM qualified talent, as same as Andy just raised. Every year the energy sector loses out to other industries such as finance and technologies. So if you look at the reports that they bring out, it's almost exactly saying that Andy has raised, as well as Justine highlighted in their slide, which gives an impression that basically all these sectors are fishing more or less, face the same issues and fishing in the same water. Can go to the next slide. So what they are, oh, this is a bit further on the STEM pipeline challenge. So on that, National Grid carried out some research and basically how many A levels in physics and maths they need, and it is quite substantial. And the words will adopt the apprenticeships levy, that's an issue in the energy sector as well. Just the ongoing uncertainty about future operation and management of this puts companies in the energy sector off to actually putting in the right process in there as well. And the number of undergraduates taking engineering and technology courses must grow significantly if they want to basically meet that shortfall that they predict now in the energy sector. So this was just continuation of the previous slide. Move to the next slide. So this is what National Grid is doing. When I attended that conference, they did give me the impression that the distribution network companies and National Grid in particular are further ahead of tackling the skills issues than energy-intensive industries. Which gives them a bit of an advantage. But practically what they're doing, amongst other things, they have set up their own academy for internal training and development of about 7.5 million per year for just employee training to address that upskilling needs as well as retention of their employees. So it continues to prepare them to adjust to the different kinds of technologies, but also to give them the training and advice so that they actually stay within the company. They've launched various recruitment campaigns over the past few years to attract people into the industry. They've got a particular adult skills program where they have basically underqualified or unqualified adults, and they train them up to go, for example, into engineering and other functions where they need people. They've hooked up with Connector for a partnership on social enterprise to basically let people know how, like a part of the awareness campaign about the attractiveness of the working space in the distribution and the transmission system operators. They also go into school, and he does that as well with CPI, and just supporting and highlighting the attractiveness of STEM-related activities and a career in the future. And they established a North Sea Link energy education sector, basically that's preparing the kind of skills that are needed for the future. So National Grid, as well as the distribution operators, are doing quite a lot to address their skills. Whether actually that's enough, I don't know, because the numbers that you look at are also quite staggering. But they are competing directly with the people that energy-intensive industries are looking for. So just to be aware of that. Back to you, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Ian. Yeah, if I could reintroduce Justine now as Chief Executive of Cogent Skills. Justine, if you wanted to just sort of prime the discussion, and then I would be very happy to queue people in with questions, comments, or any other input that they wanted to make at this point.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, I think key really is it's a massively complex, or it can feel massively complex, and I think overwhelming a little bit. Just the complexity of it, but having that real sort of forensic understanding of what are the needs that that you have, and that you think are maybe shared with others. So the first question is kind of, there's lots of issues we've identified. Have we captured what companies in these industries are experiencing, other issues that are important and that are not being dealt with really? And then I think the second one is really the appetite to address the issues. Is what's preventing people, organizations, individuals from being able to address some of the long-term issues? And you know, and is there a sort of is there more that we could be doing together to try and address some of those issues? Some of them are bigger than one company, some of them even bigger than one industry, but you can sometimes start from a small base, as I think, you know, we've demonstrated, to try and start to have some kind of impact. So really, on the, I guess, open to any companies or any other trade organisations on the group, say, you know, are there other issues that you think we haven't touched on, and if so, what are they? Or would you like to vote for any of the issues that we've identified already, where you feel actually absolutely 100% we've nailed as something that you're dealing with right now, and that you feel is a big issue?
Thank you, Justine. So if people could put their hands up if they want to intervene. I'll start the ball rolling from a paper industry perspective. I think one of the challenges that has come to the fore in our industry is the current tension between some of the short-term financial needs of businesses and the longer-term workforce development needs. And I think there is, you know, particularly as we have been going through difficult economic times, which may well persist for some time to come, yeah, would welcome your thoughts on how we keep people's eyes raised to the long term when the short-term pressures upon them are really quite great. Any other contributors who'd like to add anything to the debate at this point? Ian.
I can add one. So I got a bit involved in this when I was still a civil servant, and as part of 2050 roadmaps that we were developing at the time, there was a cross-sectoral skills issue. At that point, I struggled to understand in government who does what, because you do go through the whole education and then higher education and then apprenticeships, sits with DFT, the higher Department for Education, DFE. Apprenticeships levy sits with DBT.
Association, so we represent cement, lime, and other mineral products. So just one thing that we've identified through our work is around, following on from Ian's point, is around regulations. I think it's also important that the regulators have the skills, the training and the resources to regulate all the new technologies such as carbon capture, hydrogen, etc. So I think that's an important part of the process as well.
It's really important. Can I just come back on that one? I think it's absolutely vital that we are, this isn't the answer to everything by any stretch of the imagination, but we are leading on a piece of work for the COMA Strategic Forum, which is looking at the capacity and capability of of industry to manage safely and the regulator to regulate effectively. And that piece of work is really interesting because we're interviewing the regulators, the competent authority, and there are a number of issues around about you know, the sheer number of new companies that are going to come into the COMA regime, for example, the workforce that they need, the shortages that they've got, the salaries that they can pay, the skill set that they need, the time to that skill set. I think you're absolutely right. I think it's not just an industry, but it's a joint problem. And one of the things that we're hoping to come out of this piece of work is looking at how industry and regulators can work more together to build that pipeline. Because if you look at the demand that's coming through for process safety expertise, for example, it's going to be snapped up by the new industries. And where is that pipeline and that pool that was small anyway going to be for regulators? So can we find some mechanism to help and support them as well? So really, really good point.
Thanks, Justine. We certainly, from the paper sector side, we would chime in with a thought that the existing regulator base across a number of different sectors is actually just so uninformed about the industry that they're unable to do their job in a satisfactory way. Andy, I see you've got your hand raised, so over to you.
Thank you. Yes, there really is a fundamental role here for trade associations. And this fits in with everything that previous commentators have said. In my experience, the conventional role for trade association is members saying, tell me about the legislation that affects me today and what do I have to do? Tell me about the legislation that's coming tomorrow and do what you can to make sure it goes our way. And members, with good reason, wants to pay attention to the legislation that they have to address today and tomorrow. We need, as trade associations, to build a broader offering, which is to say we can do the same concept in the whole field of apprenticeship skills and training. We need to work with members to identify their longer term needs. It's not today, it's not tomorrow, but we're bringing in apprenticeships for 5 and 25 years time. We need to have that long-term view, and trade associations need to encourage that discussion, thinking in the same way as we do on the conventional regulatory piece, engaging the companies, identifying what their concerns are, engaging government and working out how we can develop things to our advantage. Example I gave, the whole funding situation in Wales and Scotland. And then there's also a piece for trade associations to try and make it as easy as possible for members. I have one example where one of our paper companies, or actually I learned about it from the apprentice directly, and this apprentice told me that her company was going out in local newspapers and on LinkedIn to engage 16-year-olds and 18-year-olds. And she looked at me and said, 16, 18-year-olds don't read newspapers. They're not on LinkedIn. So we just need to think about how to make it easy for companies. A company that's thinking like that, well, okay, we need to work with them and think about how do we engage. So some steps, some simple guidelines, whatever it is, another role for trade association. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Karen, I see you've got your hand up again. If you could introduce yourself, and then by all means, let's hear your contribution.
Hello, my name's Karen Wright and I work for Heidelberg Materials. I'm also chair of council for the Mineral Products Qualifications Council, so I sort of wear two hats. Really listened intently and recognise all of the issues that have been raised as being relevant to us as an industry and us as an organisation as well. Interestingly, through MPQC, we have been working on a model now for the last couple of years to identify each of these areas, from developing the NOS and updating the NOS, National Occupational Standards, and then ensuring that all of our qualifications and apprenticeships, if they aren't already mapped across to the NOS because they've been in existence for a long time, but they're being updated through a review period. So the model that we work with, including we've just recently gone out to the industry to pull together our labour market information, so that the stats coming out of there are very interesting, and all they do is tell us what we already know in terms of the ageing workforce, the diversity and all of the other things, but what they do is help us to use that as a base to put together our strategy as an industry. What I think is would be really good moving forward is that we're all trying to do the same thing. So MPQC are doing that on behalf of the extended extractive industry. There are some crossovers into some of the industry sitting around the table here, and certainly bringing in some of the newer areas like nuclear, carbon capture and so on and so forth, I think are really important. And it would be probably a real shame and a duplication of effort if we don't all tie in together. Now, I know that we can't go on and on and on joining forces, but I certainly think that there is a benefit in pooling resources with MPQC, as well as everybody sitting around the table, because we're all trying to do the same thing. We all need the same skills for the future. We're all identifying the same gaps. And I think certainly in terms of attracting new people to the industry, it would be great if we could all pool our resources to have a bigger campaign, to a bigger pool of people to attract, and then let them choose. So I think there's so many things that we could do. We've just got to get the right people sitting around the table. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Karen. And I think your point about collaboration is well made, and you have in a way given away part of my conclusions already in terms of what I was going to say. But before I do finally tie things together for the end of the session, are there any other points that people would like to make, questions to ask, comments to add to the discussion before I sum up? Karen,
sorry,
again,
sorry, just one point that has been a real sticking point for us, and you've mentioned apprenticeships. It's the lack of fit for purpose apprenticeship approach in terms of the funding, the application of being able to pull down funds across the UK is a real problem, and it would be great if one of the remits that could get picked up would be to lobby government on making apprenticeships fit for purpose, and other education as well. You know, they seem to be hell bent on going down certain routes to fill gaps that aren't fit for purpose. And it would be really great if we could actually get employers together to lobby government to make sure that whatever it is that we're skilling people and bringing people through school or it within the industry on apprenticeships, that they actually are fit for purpose. They're getting better, but they're by no means fit for purpose, really.
Thank you, Karen. Justine, I'll hand over to you and then I'll sum up.
Yeah, thanks. Just a comment on the devolved nations. I think we are on the cusp of an opportunity as well, insofar as I reflected on the fact that I think the past 10 years has been the first time we've ever seen completely different political parties in power in every single one of the nations, pulling in different directions with a reason to pull in a different direction. And it could be, potentially, depending on the outcome of the election, a very interesting and quick win for an incoming government if it had a mandate across. And I know you still got the devolved nations and the devolved parliaments, but a very quick win and good opportunity to bring greater synergy across the UK in terms of that apprenticeship piece. So I think it's something that has a moment in time to be lobbying around about, and a great opportunity.
Thank you, Justine. Well, first of all, can I extend my thanks again to our speakers today, so particularly to Justine, to Ian and to Andy. And could I also just say thank you to Kate and to Rachel Roby, who've been in the background making sure that all this has worked extremely smoothly. I'm very grateful for your help and support on that. I think we've had a clear view today about the scale of the challenge. I think we can see that both the energy and the energy intensive industries are all looking at the same issue, and they are looking at it in the same way. And I think we can see that there is competition for what is risking to be a declining workforce. We have this new demand for new qualifications and skills for people at the same time as we have a greater restriction on UK immigration. We have demographic change in the UK, and we have challenges with the skills infrastructure. So I think what that says to us is that we've got a huge opportunity to collaborate. I think that opportunity is very much there, and the time is now right to seize it. We can see the potential there for industry to grow, for our members to grow. And we need to make sure that we have the right people in place for those industries so that they can take advantage of the global opportunities that are there. So the call to action is, for those industries and for those companies who want to participate in that collaboration, who want to put together the consortium that we can start to identify the skills needs in more detail on the energy side and then move forwards, please contact Arjen, Director of the Energy Intensive Users Group. His details are, I believe, on the last slide, and also will be available to everybody as part of the follow-up. And I would just encourage people to engage with Arjen. This is an area that EIUG is very much wanting to take forwards, and we're very much, believing that this is the right thing to do at the right time to build an industry that can be competitive in the net zero environment that is new to us all, but is coming to all of us at greater pace perhaps than we can really comprehend at the moment. So I see that we're now exactly at 1:30. So thanks everybody for participating. Very much enjoyed that and thought it was useful as a first step forward into shared work on the skills agenda. I'll draw things to a close now, but thank you all very much and I hope you have a very good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Andrew. Bye.
Thank you.